Good morning. I'm really happy to introduce our opening speaker tonight, or today, this morning. Didn't sleep well last night. DeEtta Jones will be speaking with us. So for over 20 years, she has guided people and organizations through the process of fundamental transformation. She's been a leading voice in shaping contemporary thinking and practice around integrated and sustained approaches to personal transformation, workplace culture, diversity, and inclusion. Before launching DeEtta Jones and Associates in 2005, she has served for 10 years as Director of Diversity and then the Director of Office of Leadership and Management Services at the Association of Research Libraries, an international nonprofit representing the largest research institutions in North America. In these roles, DeEtta was called upon as a thought leader to set the direction for the design and oversight of more than 9 international leadership programs, as well as a suite of professional development services, including training and organization development. Prior to this, she was the Director of Multicultural Education at Colorado State University and the Director of Human Rights Advocacy and Education for the City of Fort Collins. DeEtta has served as an adjunct faculty member teaching undergraduates and graduate courses on leadership and diversity at Colorado State University and at the University of Maryland, College Park. DeEtta has a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in students affairs in higher education from Colorado State University, and an MBA from the Johns Hopkins University. She lives outside of Chicago, Illinois with her husband and their children. So thank you, and welcome DeEtta to the stage.
Good morning. Thank you for that great welcome. It's great to be here. Let me make sure I can get the slides projecting. So this morning, I wanted to talk to you about leadership. That's the topic that I'm in love with, and I have been in love with for a very long time, but also it's one of those kind of topics that never really goes out of style, especially as we kind of watch and witness different styles of leadership and how that impacts the way that we interact, the way that we manage and lead our organizations, and also the way that we show up, our own kind of motivation, our own engagement levels, and even how we perceive ourselves. And so what I want to do is talk to you this morning about a concept called courageous leadership. And courageous leadership isn't a specific kind of leadership that has a kind of a book written about it necessarily, but what are the attributes of people like us, all of us, in any role in our organizations or outside of our organizations, like people who are leading NASIG, and the opportunities for really acting courageously when courage is actually the thing that is probably most fundamental for leadership right now. That just having values, that just having passion, that just having ambition is probably not enough. In today's world, we also need to take risks. We need to be able to have kind of the internal fortitude to get through difficult times. We need to be able to act sometimes even when we are facing something that is fear-inducing. And so the idea of courageous leadership seemed like a really wonderful opportunity, especially right now for us in our professional community who are looking for leaders and who are calling upon people in every position in all of our organizations to really lead. So what does courageous leadership look like? Well, I don't need to tell you anything else about myself. I think that it was all said, so I'm skipping over the bio. There's nothing else about me. But the only thing that I'm going to change about myself in that bio is, I think, represented beautifully on this slide. And it is that I myself made a courageous leap out of Chicago recently and to Miami. That's me, that little fish, that's me, that's DeEtta. It was courageous, it was courageous. Let me tell you why it was courageous. Well, it's kind of obvious. Like, I don't need to even talk a whole lot about why I left. Here, I'll give you one word: weather. That's it. I literally left for the weather. There were no other criteria. I literally was like, I cannot take another winter in Chicago, and that was it. It was done talking about the weather. I was done having the weather be primary to every conversation I had. But every conversation was about the weather. But the courageous part was really thinking about all of the stuff that goes along with making a decision, even when there's an aspirational destination on the other end of a choice, it still takes a lot of effort to act, right? It got, for years, I got caught up with, I want to go there, but I don't want to move and pack and find a place to live and find new doctor's office and new dentists and new friends and new routes to work, all new routes to the airport and learn new. I didn't want to have to learn all of those things. So even when there's something that is desirable, right, that we're going toward, the act of doing it still takes a tremendous amount of courage. Right. And so for all of us, what are the things in our lives and what are the opportunities that we have in our workplaces, in our professional opportunities and roles, in our relationship management, where we have something that's aspirational, but it still is going to take the kind of effort and discipline associated with making a choice to act. By the way, I'm there now and I'm very happy. I'm ridiculously happy. So what does it take to be courageous? To me, there are a couple of things that are kind of under what it takes to be courageous. I think that we, all of us, and when I say the word leader, I literally mean every single person in this room, all of us are leaders. I do not think that leadership is kind of isolated to titular roles, that all of us have opportunities to lead and all of us do lead in a variety of different ways. And we have responsibility, I think, also to lead and to see ourselves as leaders, to see ourselves as messengers, to care about the way that the way that we communicate and how it impacts other people and not just ourselves. I think that that is our responsibility as professionals, as colleagues, as individuals who are part of organizational cultures and also kind of national culture that we really are trying to infuse with values that will allow us to be kind of better, stronger, faster together. So what does it take to be a courageous leader? I think it takes emotional intelligence and cultural competence every day. Every day is a really important part of this slide. A lot of times what we do is we make a choice between intensity and consistency. If those are your two options, choose consistency. Intensity is great, but consistency wins the day, always. Consistency is where people build credibility. It's where we build trust. It's where people start to have the consistency associated with leaders that is desired. It is one of the most desirable leadership characteristics that people articulate, is that they want to know and not be surprised by the actions of their leaders. And so consistency every single day, kind of showing up, being the person that I say I am and that I want to be, always wins the day. Now, what are emotional intelligence and cultural competence? Emotional intelligence, I'm going to do kind of a simple little overview here that is probably familiar to all of you, because emotional intelligence is not a concept that is kind of relegated only to people who study leadership development. But I'm going to give kind of a non-scientific rendering just for a moment. So the way our human brains are wired is something along these lines. The human brains are wired so that we respond to emotions before we think analytically. So a lot of us think that we're very logical. We are, but we're more emotional than logical. We humans are wired to be emotional first for all sorts of survival purposes. And we are more acutely attuned to fear than the other emotions for all sorts of really smart reasons, right? So when something is fear-inducing, it triggers us very quickly. We experience the emotion of fear very quickly when we are encountered by something that induces that fear. So some sort of a triggering event, right? So if you and I had an argument yesterday and you're my boss and then you and I see each other and you give me a little side-eye glance, that automatically triggers a little emotion in me. Now that would never happen, I know, because we're tight like that. But that triggers. So it's not like our wiring, our brain wiring is old school. It's meant for, fighting off bears. But in our workplace environments, what we're actually kind of triggered by are little kind of slights, right? Little sort of feelings of vulnerability that come from interacting with other humans most of the time. But the emotion of fear is still the same thing that's happening. That's still the same thing that is being triggered. And what happens is when fear is felt, where there's something in the environment that triggers fear, what happens is my amygdala releases cortisol. The cortisol redirects energy or resources from the smart part of my brain to my extremities. I basically go into fight, flight, or flee mode, right? So as I tell my son, I'm all cortisoled up, right? He's 11. Baby, you're all cortisoled up right now, right? And so what happens is that I temporarily dumb down the parts of my brain that are smart, problem solving, analytical, curious, willing to say, wait, that's not typical behavior. Let me just pause and see what's going on. Maybe I should check in with you. That part of my brain is temporarily, literally unavailable to me. That's tricky, especially if I'm a leader and people are expecting me to show up and be the person that they need to have at the helm at that moment, right? And so when I'm all cortisoled up, it's hard for me to create space for other ideas, to be generous, to say, whoa, wait, let's not quickly jump to conclusions. It's hard for me to say yes or how or tell me more. It may be easier for me to say, no, we tried that 5 years ago and it didn't work, and keep it moving, right? And so the emotional intelligence, the emotionally intelligent part is really understanding that sometimes I am responding based on things that are beyond my kind of analytical control. And it has to do with literally kind of how my brain and emotions are wiring me and implicating the way that I'm behaving and showing up. This is really important because for courageous leadership to actually be something that I'm able to act on, what needs to happen is that I need to know that sometimes my physiology is working against me. And I also need to know that as a leader, people are going to expect me to be able to create space, to be emotionally intelligent, to be inclusive, to say just the right words, to not miss a beat while I am all cortisoled up a lot of the time. Because a lot of the times as leaders, we are all cortisoled up. And it's because we're running fast and we constantly have people who are looking at us and expecting things of us that are kind of singularly focused on us, which is oftentimes the definition of leader. There's kind of a singular focus on us and our behavior, which makes it a kind of a high vulnerability experience. So I'm sharing this with you because we'll continue to build upon this, but this is really important just to think about. One of the times and places where we actually have the ability to kind of let the cortisol levels get back to kind of normal exhale place where we can actually think about how it is that we want to show up and be the emotionally intelligent leaders. Cultural competence is really being able to have not just the awareness, but also the ability to adapt my behavior in order to navigate the nuances associated with moving in and out of different cultural environments. And it requires not that I know every single thing about every single culture, but that I'm curious about it, definitely, and that I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to do my own work, but that I also see myself as a cultural being, that I understand my own culture, I understand my own filters, I understand my own biases, I understand my own privilege, I understand the places where power dynamics have an impact on me and the ways that I interact with other people. And those together, cultural competence and emotional intelligence, that's a whole lot of stuff. So it doesn't say a lot on the screen, but it's an awful lot of stuff for people to carry around as far as being kind of expectations of leaders every day. So what does it look like in action? If we are going to be these courageous leaders every day, if we are going to show up in the service of our organizations and really kind of help our organizations and ourselves and our professional communities and our colleagues thrive, what does it look like? Well, Nelson Mandela is one of those people who, here's the thing about Nelson Mandela. You can kind of go anywhere in the world and people will not disagree with Nelson Mandela as a leader, right? There's a whole lot of people where it's kind of culturally nuanced. Oh, I don't know. Nelson Mandela, people are like, yep, yep, that counts, right? And Nelson Mandela, the beautiful thing is that we have so many kind of wise words and experiences. God knows he had a lot of time to reflect and capture his thoughts and share with us. It's not about the absence of fear. It's about being able to act in the face of fear, right? And I don't mean fear as in you're in harm's way physically necessarily, like he was many times, but oftentimes just kind of emotionally being concerned about, if I say this, how's that going to come across? Or if I do this, or if I don't do that, right? Those little tiny things that are actually having the exact same experiences on our amygdala that are keeping us sometimes from making the tough choices. And sometimes those are small choices, but actually can have a significant impact on how we show up and how we have a positive influence on our organization. So what do we do then to think about what it is that we can bring into our own lives and into our own practices? Well, we can begin by just bringing into focus the things that are particularly important for us, right? So let's think about what those things are. Let's bring into focus what the things are that could be particularly helpful for us as we continue on our leadership journey. So here are the 6 buckets of things that I'd like to just talk about a little bit each. And I'll go through each of these slide by slide. But I believe that it's really important for us, for every single one of us, to be anchored to aspiration. I'll talk about that. To be values driven, to be what I like to describe as in the service of, to be emotionally intelligent and culturally competent, which I already mentioned, to be trustworthy. Trust is the word that probably comes up more than any other word when I go into organizations. I have spent almost 30 years wandering around organizations, literally all over the world. And I get called all the time about all sorts of things. Sometimes people say, hey, can you do a workshop? Like the library leadership and management workshops, the library management skills institutes, a lot of the leadership development programs. I've done a lot of strategic planning consulting, a lot of organizational change consulting, restructuring, all sorts of different things. Regardless of what the ask is, when I get there, the word that comes up a little bit kind of digging, tell me a little bit more about what you want or need. Tell me a little bit more about kind of what the underlying expectations are. Tell me a little bit about the things that might be getting in the way. Over and over and over and over and over and over, the singular word that comes up more than anything else is trust. And here's the tricky part about trust. It doesn't work like this. Poof, you trust me. It doesn't. There are plenty of leaders over time who have come in and said, I really want to change the culture of this organization. Just trust me. Poof, I have open door policy. And guess what? Nothing happens. It just doesn't work like that. And so really thinking about how it is that trustworthiness is created and maintained is a really great opportunity. And then equity oriented, and we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so let's start off a little bit with this anchored aspiration. I actually think that this can't be underscored enough. And it's my own bias that's leading me to this. There's also a lot of science behind it. I think that there's something really, really powerful about focusing on aspiration. And in the absence of focusing on aspiration, something kind of negative happens that has a depleting effect over time at the individual level and then at the collective level. So let's talk about this. So our energy goes where we are focused. So let's talk a little bit about vision. Let me just start off. And so aspiration as in vision, as in the destination, where we want to be. So for you, just a little tiny exercise. Think about something that you created. Anything at all, just for yourself. Just think about something you created, get it in your mind's eye. Now, move from your mind's eye kind of down to your heart and think about the effort and the energy that went into bringing that creation into being. So I'm going to go back to mine just for sharing purposes. I have an 11-year-old. That's what I created. It's still a work in process. He's my little masterpiece in process. We'll see. I'm the master. We're working on each other. So I have a vision for a child who's happy and healthy and whole. Right? Who feels whole, who feels confident, who feels able to be a full kind of citizen in the world. Right? That's my vision. That's my aspiration. Right? And that vision gets me out of bed every single day. Every single day. I have a lot of other things that I care about, but nothing else gets me out of bed in the morning like he does. Even if I'm not with him, that is my aspiration. Now let's hold that taut. Every single day ain't been no crystal stair, right? Every single day, he's not equally happy or healthy or whole. And neither am I. Every single day is not perfect, but I don't measure by every day. What I measure about is the destination. That's what vision is about. And for your organizations, it's the same. What is the ideal aspiration? Where is it that we're trying to go that get us out of bed together? What are we trying to create, to bring into existence? So my child is something that's personal, but a lot of us have created a lot of things that are in our organizations as well, right? We created this conference. That's amazing. I know it's hard. I know you're still in the thick of it, but by Saturday, you're going to look in the rearview mirror and you're going to be like, that was awesome, right? You've created committees, you've created all sorts of products and processes, you've created working teams, you've created process improvements. There's all sorts of things that we have created that you can feel the effort, that you can remember the effort that went into it, and then feel the associated affirmation that comes from having done something that really allowed you to bring something into being or solve a problem that needed to be solved. The energy between vision, aspiration, something that I either want to bring into being or a problem that I want to solve, and current reality, which is where I'm starting from, is called eustress. From here, where I am to where I want to be, that energy of bringing something into being is called eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. It's creative energy, and it is naturally motivating to humans. We like it. It doesn't mean it's always easy, doesn't mean that we're not exhausted sometimes, but we stay at it because it's satisfying. It's satisfying to accomplish it or to move in the direction of it, right? That's as satisfying, and it's intrinsically motivating, which is a wonderful thing for you to know as leaders, even if you're just leading yourselves, to know that that energy from current reality to where I want to be, that aspirational destination, is energy worth investing in, right? That was me, Chicago, Miami, keep going, right? Now, on the other end of this continuum is something called fear. In the absence of a compelling vision, in the absence of knowing where it is that we want to go, in the absence of having a vision that is really kind of really concrete in my mind that I can see myself in, that's worthy enough for me to make the Herculean effort necessary to get from here to there, what happens is human energy naturally goes to fear, unfortunately, at the individual level and at the collective level. And this is how fear works. Remember that little brain wiring thing that I just imagined? I just described as far as emotional intelligence? That's that, where we're kind of all cortisoled up collectively, right? So in an organization, in the absence of saying, here's where we're going, or in a professional community, or in a country, right? In the United States, in the absence of saying, here's where we're going together, then what happens is that we all kind of are in a state where the energy is instead being redirected to fear, and fear causes us to kind of hunker down, and we have less access to the smart parts of our brain, the parts of our brain that will allow us to say, let's figure this out together. Let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. Let's figure out how it is that we could be more creative and more problem solving and take risks that we wouldn't otherwise take because we know that they're in the service of something greater, right? And the tricky part is that we cannot be innovative. We cannot harness our equity and diversity opportunities. We cannot have creative breakthroughs if we are living in a place of fear. And this is also the place where leadership comes into play. Your job as leaders is to help us. Let me look at where we're here. Your job as leaders is to help us kind of focus this direction. Okay, folks, let's focus on where we're going. I know there are some unknowns. Let's refocus on where we're going. I know that we haven't been there before. Let's refocus on where we're going. So as leaders, our job is to kind of like this, focus people and facilitate people in the direction of what is our shared aspiration. So that creative tension and that emotional tension are competing with each other, and our opportunity as leaders is to really tap into the creative tension. So the next thing on the list of 6 that I gave was about values driven. For you, I'm going to encourage you to think about what are your own values and how do other people know about them? Not just how do you know, but what are you doing every single day to make sure that your values are evident in your decisions, in your actions, in the way that you communicate? So a lot of times when I do coaching of leaders, which I do quite a lot of people who are in senior leadership roles, whether it's directors or associate university librarians or people in management workshops, what people, especially right now in 2019, are wrestling with is values. Now, I've been talking, because I love the topic of leadership and I love the topic of interculturalism and diversity, about values for 30 years. But for 30 years, it's been a little too mushy. It's like, we got real work to do. Now, all of a sudden, people are like, oh, it is about values, right? It is about values. Every single thing is about values. Everything is about values. To say, oh, we're going to save the values conversation for the 5-year later strategic planning process, and we'll talk about our values and we'll talk about them in the spirit of creating a statement every 3 to 5 years is useless. Values is not about a statement. If the way that you are talking about values in your organization is only about kind of the grammar of your values, you're missing the whole point. The point of values 100% of the time is to drive behaviors. So be able to talk about your values, but start off with yourself. What are my values and how do those show up behaviorally? And then in your organizations, it doesn't even have to be organization-wide. Think about what your sphere of influence is, and then think about how is it that we're having discussions about what our individual and collective values are and how those values are showing up demonstrably. How are those values showing up in the way that we communicate, in how much transparency we have in our communication and our decision-making processes, about who's involved in decision-making processes, in the way that we do coaching and feedback, in the way that we think about rewards and recognition. It doesn't have to be that it has to be a whole separate activity, right? Values permeate every single thing we do and should. And to the extent that we can get an alignment and an integration between our values, our espoused values, and how they show up in action behaviorally, then we'll go a long way to have a positive impact on trust. That's actually how trust is built. What we say we stand for and how we actually show up are consistent. That's how you build and nurture trust, right? The alignment between those two. But that only happens if we are intentionally having those conversations on a regular basis and not thinking of them as a whole separate conversation. Values rich should be the way that we operate constantly and in a way that really is integral to our work. The third point, always be in the service of. And so in the service of, I always hold it up like this because this is oftentimes what I would see in organizations. I'll go into a library and there'll be a cabinet, the senior team will be sitting around the table and we'll be having a conversation about the strategy of the organization, for example. And people will say, well, in my portfolio, we do this. And somebody else will say, well, in my portfolio, we do that. Well, in my part of the organization, I'm responsible for this. And in my part of the organization, I'm responsible for that. There shouldn't be my part of the organization for any of us, right? In the optimal world, as far as organizations and leadership, and as far as the opportunity for organizations to really pursue strategy, it should be always. We should all be in the service of the whole. All of us should be in the service of the whole. The most healthy and high-functioning organizations have senior leadership and managers and everyone else in the organization seeing themselves in the service of the whole, which means that we can look across portfolios, right? So yes, I have responsibility for managing a certain portfolio, but my first and primary responsibility is to the entire organization. And so let's think about across all of the different parts of the organization, regardless of what the org chart says, what is it that we can do to make sure that resources are appropriately flowing to different parts of the organization? Or to make sure that I'm not thinking of holding back information because I don't want to lose that line just in case I find the perfect candidate, when really there's another part of the organization that actually has a need. What is it that we can do to kind of shift our frame of reference so that we're thinking about ourselves and we're starting to practice being in the service of the whole? And that counts at every part of the organization. It absolutely is essential for that to start at the very kind of top of the organization, as far as the organizational chart. But to the extent that we can build those practices in over and over again, being in the service of the whole, we'll be able to have a lot more kind of efficiency. And again, this helps nurture trust, right? Really thinking of ourselves as there collectively. This one is my favorite little number. So this is a statistic, a ratio that comes from the research associated with the Center for Creative Leadership. And this is a really important little number. This is a kind of a tweetable little number. So the Center for Creative Leadership is a wonderful organization that has been doing leadership research and development for many, many years. And they're a not-for-profit. They're based out of Greensboro, North Carolina. And they were started by the Heinz family, you know, the ketchup folks. And yeah. Yes, that's right. They're right. Good stuff, right? And so what they also developed a lot of the instruments that are associated with leadership. They're 360 instruments. You know, 360 where I take an instrument, like I do my own self-assessment on certain leadership capabilities and characteristics and behaviors. And then I give it to my boss, and I give it to my peers, and I give it to people who report to me. And then there's this huge compilation of 360-degree feedback that says, here's how I see myself, and here's how other people see me, and to the extent to which there's variance, right? It can be eye-opening, let's just say that, to see that. But what they found, because they've done hundreds of thousands of these all over the world, and this is not library-specific data, so don't think that this number is library-specific data. But what they found is that the people in the most senior kind of titular leadership roles have this kind of a gap that exists, this 1 to 0.321. And this is how it goes. I see myself as 1. 0.321 is the way that other people view my behaviors, according to these 16 characteristics that they have identified on their instrumentation. That means 60+% of the time, I am perceiving myself differently, or I am viewing myself differently than I am being perceived. Talk about intent versus impact, right? So the way that I perceive myself and the way that other people perceive me is very different the higher I go in an organization. This is not library-specific data. This is senior leaders, industries across many, many different industries and across the world. But it's a note to all of us, regardless of where we are in our leadership trajectory, to say, okay, noted. What happens is the higher I go, the more possibility there is for me to have a blind spot, or a big blind spot, or a growing blind spot. So why is this important, and why does this happen? So first of all, it's important because if I don't know how I am perceived, I am not able to be influential, or I'm very significantly limited on my ability to be influential. If I think that how I'm showing up is working and it's actually not working, and I just keep doing more of it, or just keep doing it more of it but louder or faster, and the effects are going to be more damaging than positive, right? And again, a lot of times leaders say, I'm doing it. I am being transparent. I am communicating. I've sent out 5,000 blog posts, or I asked for open anonymous feedback, or whatever. You know, I sent all the meeting minutes, and people are like, that's not what we're asking for, right? But a lot of times these big blind spots happen because, and this is the why of why this gap exists. The why this gap exists is because as people ascend in titular leadership roles, 2 things happen. 1, they get less feedback that is corrective or constructive. I didn't use negative on purpose, but they get less feedback about things that can be improved than they did at other points in their career potentially, right? Because of power dynamics. They're peerless or more peerless, right? And two, they ask for feedback less. And they ask for feedback less because they're like, yeah, I've already done this. I know I'm good at this, or else I wouldn't be in this role. Or they ask for feedback less that is disconfirming their previously held belief about themselves. So we have this kind of way of wiring in our brain that means once we have a belief about ourselves or about other people, we autopilot, go to kind of selecting data that reinforces that previously held belief. Right? There's a really wonderful reference here called the ladder of inference that describes how this brain wiring works. But once we have a belief about ourselves, like I am incredibly competent, I am well regarded, I have an open door policy, people respond to me, whatever that belief is that I have about myself, I automatically select data that reinforces that belief of myself, and I deselect automatically on autopilot data that disconfirms that previously held belief. Right? So what that means is that over time, I start to concretize beliefs about myself that may or may not actually reflect how other people are perceiving me. And this blind spot, this 1 to 0.321 ratio grows. This is really useful to know because that big mechanism that I just described, beliefs about whatever my belief is, I select on autopilot data that reinforces it, is also the way bias works. That is the definition of bias, that little loop that I just described. And the fact that our brains are wired to do that, not just about ourselves, but about other people as well, is really important to note, especially in a world where we're talking a lot about bias, right? That we're wired this way, and it really requires intention, deliberate intention to say, let me think about what other data exists and data that might disconfirm my previously held beliefs or challenge them. So So how do we close this gap? If you have a 1 to 0.321 gap, which none of us do, this is not our, this was not from our data pool. But if you have an opportunity or a desire to make sure that your gap between how you see yourself and how other people see you is small, or that you're being as effective as possible and showing up the way you want to, how do you do that? Well, here's how you do it. You practice. More importantly, you practice with a coach. So Serena, again, kind of like Nelson Mandela, there's not a whole lot of arguments out there. Like, she's just a badass. Everybody knows that. Like, period. There's just drop the mic, right? But Serena doesn't just go out and like hit balls, right? Serena goes out and practices in a very deliberate methodological way, right? And with a coach. And so here's the value of having a coach. And I'm not saying all of us need to have like life coaches walking around behind us in order to be leaders, but we do need to have some mechanism that gives us feedback about ourselves that comes from the external environment. So let's think about it. Let's think about Serena Williams. So Serena, like all other masterful performers, if you're a musician, no matter what it is that you do, right? If you're masterful at it, everybody does the same thing, right? All masterful performers do the same thing. They practice perfectly, and they build in small feedback loops. Tiny little feedback loops. And this is how it works for Serena. Let's just think about this. So her coach is standing there. There's a swing. She takes a swing, and the coach says, okay, next time, bring that shoulder back, bring that elbow in, go back a little further on, carry through a little bit further on your racket, right? And they keep doing that over and over and over. Okay, shoulder back a little bit more. Okay, now move this hip. Now change that foot placement. Over and over and over. Tiny little feedback loops. That is beautiful practice. Tiny little feedback loops where you over and over and over get it until you get it right. Now, that's totally opposite of the way our organizations are designed. You know that, right? Unfortunately, our organizations are designed where we have once a year performance. I don't know about your organizations, but I'm going to make a guess here. We have a once a year annual performance conversation that's expected, right? We may have more than that, but typically it's about once a year, and it's looking in the rearview mirror. Okay, it's at the end of the year looking at last year. Totally not useful at all for masterful performance. That is not how masterful performance is built. It may be able to give you that end of the year kind of, incremental salary increase, that 1.325 increase that you wanted to get. I know how this works, right? So we get our little salary increases, and they're often like so modest, but the bigger point is that it actually doesn't connect to masterful performance, which is what we're seeking. What we want is for people to be able to feel masterful, because especially in our professional community, we care a lot about mastery, right? Autonomy, mastery, and purpose, those are the three kind of cornerstones of motivation, and mastery is really important to us in our professional community. All of us, most of us, I would guess that people in this room, you're here because this is part of your identity. This isn't just a job. You're not just clocking in and out. Well, not in this professional community. There are some professional communities where people are clocking in and out, but librarianship, no, that's not us, right? We are here because this is central to our identity. I go on social media. You go on social media. Just do a quick little analysis. Go look on your social media feed. Everybody's name is librarian/mom/cat lover. It's librarian first, or our librarian, archivist, whatever it is, but it always starts with librarian or archivist or whatever it is. And then, oh yeah, by the way, I'm a mom, or I'm this, I'm that. It's a doggone this thing. This is a very central part of our identity. So this mastery is incredibly important to us. What it means is that we have to build in mechanisms that lay on top of until we get more until we adjust our current systems, like our performance systems, our performance management systems that we have in some of our institutions. We have to, on top of those, have additional ways of building in this masterful practice, right? In these small feedback loops where we have a coach, or we have each other, or we have mechanisms set up to be able to say, how is it that we build in small feedback loops that allow us to, without feeling threatened or exposed or vulnerable, be able to make the adjustments that are going to be necessary as we take on big workforce transformation opportunities. When I'm out at different universities and campuses, the things that people are asking of us when I'm sitting with faculty, last week I was at several universities having focus groups and talking with your faculty and administrators and students, undergraduate and graduates, what they expect of us. Oh my goodness. it's complicated and it keeps changing. And oh, by the way, they're not trying to let go of anything. They want all that stuff that we've always done, and that specific person and they name the names, and that specific person who's invaluable and irreplaceable. And then we also want all of these things that are incredibly complicated and new, and that, oh, by the way, we didn't learn in library school, right? And so how is it that we do that and continue to do that in a way that allows us to not be so overwhelmed that we're in fear mode, versus still kind of anchoring to aspiration and seeing this as affirming and seeing this kind of in the sense of going from current reality to vision, but not being so overwhelmed by it that instead we're kind of hunkering down and we're all cortisoled up and can't take the risks, can't invest the energy, can't work with a coach because we don't want to be seen as not masterful as we're moving forward. So trustworthiness is also on the list. And trustworthiness is something that I just want to share here. And I mentioned it already, but trustworthiness is something that is not just about them. You know, a lot of times when I'm in organizations and in libraries and I'm talking and the word trust comes up, oftentimes it either starts with an equity-based conversation or it starts with communication, right? Communication is that huge word. Well, what could be better here? Communication. And it, you know, just boom, just like that, right? And it's a big word. And when you kind of drill down a little bit, people talk about some of the implications associated with not having what they would describe as the most effective communication. And when I say effective communication, what I think people oftentimes mean is transparent. What they mean is transparent. And even the definition of transparency takes a little bit of kind of understanding and agreement on what that means behaviorally. But what people want is to be able to be trusted and to be seen as trustworthy. And so one of the opportunities for us is to really remember that, especially as far as our professional community, we put a lot of value in our competence. We put a lot of value in our mastery and our ability to be really wonderful, exemplary practitioners. But we also have to think about, in addition, what it is that we can do to really exemplify how trustworthy we are. And it doesn't mean that we just can do stuff, that we just get tasks accomplished. Being trustworthy is the how, right? It's not just the what, it's often the how. And it's how do we message? How do we hold confidences? How do we avoid gossip? How do we stand up for our values, for our spouse values in ways that are creating space and helping us learn, right? That's the how sort of thing. And that's not relegated to someone else. Trustworthiness is not just about those folks with those titles. It's about me every single day. And again, it's about consistency, not just intensity. So consistency, not just intensity. So there's some data, that really wonderful research on the topic of, it's on the topic of positivity, to tell you the truth, but it's really about effective human interaction. So there's a wonderful researcher, her name is Barbara Fredrickson, and she's done a lot of research on interpersonal and organizational effectiveness, behaviorally speaking. And what she found, and a lot of other researchers found this as well, because there's a huge body of research about this, is that interactions where people are more generous with each other, where they're asking how kinds of questions. So you may say, hey, DeEtta, I have this idea. I think we should try X or Y. And I could easily say, you know what, we tried that a couple years ago. It didn't work. Or I could say, you know, we don't have the budget for that. Or, oh, that's not really in our purview. But if I actually wanted to intentionally create space, if I really wanted to intentionally make sure that we're practicing living our values, what I might say is, I don't know if I kind of easily am making the connection there, but tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking. Let's just tease it out, right? That tiny little pause, that tiny little adjustment, right? Not quick to say no, but quicker to say how, or let's just create some space. Those kinds of interactions, even if we don't actually do what your suggestion was, but creating space for exploring and for listening and for making sure that people are authentically able to be heard, those sorts of things actually lead to teams over time being more productive and more constructive and more creative together. So that little example that I just gave actually leads groups of people to more productive and more creative solutions. Here's why. because people are not afraid to share their ideas because because they're not assuming that their ideas are going to be attacked. Right now, in a lot of our environments, people don't share ideas that are new or far-fetching or that are not things that are kind of obvious because, and people say this to me all the time, because of fear of retribution. Then this phrase comes up. I cannot tell you how many times I hear this phrase on a daily basis, fear of retribution. Now, we're in libraries. There's places in the world that have a lot more retribution, but I'll just keep it focused on us. But the way people feel emotionally about their ideas not being heard or not being considered, it feels like retribution to people, right? And so to be able to make tiny little shifts that every single one of us have the ability to make actually leads people to being more generous with the way that they share and practice sharing in a way that allows for dissenting points of view to be surfaced, for voices that are often unheard or not listened to maybe for power dynamics to shift. And that leads to more creative and more productive environments. Here's what else it leads to: resilience. It leads to resilience. Resilience means teams that practice interacting in ways that I just described, where there's more kind of opportunity for inclusion and for creating space and for listening and to dissenting points of view and for acknowledging and valuing different voices and contributions, right? They also, just like the rest of us, have tough times hit. Something goes wrong sometimes, right? But they bounce back faster. They bounce back faster because they're able to give each other the benefit of the doubt, because the ratio with which they're practicing the positive, encouraging, inclusive behaviors is disproportionate to the one time something didn't go wrong. And so if something didn't go wrong this one time, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt because I know this is an off day. I know that's not typical of us, right? And that resilience cannot be underplayed. So the researcher, Barbara Fredrickson, came up with this language, and she called the theory associated with what I described of these healthy teams and these teams that are really creative and connected as the broaden and build theory. What that means is that people are able to broaden the array of possibilities that they have available to them and then build upon them, which takes advantage of synergistic exchange, which is exactly why we do things like have diverse teams in the first place. It's exactly what we say we value. And then oftentimes, unfortunately, we say we value diversity in teams, but oftentimes what we actually practice is, no, just hang tight. You're still new here. Just hang tight and just learn how things work around here before you contribute. Afterwards, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Or wait till you get tenure and then you can really put your neck out there, or whatever it is. Right? So the broaden and build theory is really saying, how is it that we create space because it behooves the organization, it behooves the team, and it absolutely builds trust within the individuals and helps the organization thrive. This is one of my very favorite sayings, and it's equity lives in the process. And this is something that I think should just be something that we can consider over and over. In our professional community, we are more task-oriented than process-oriented. We're a tasky profession. And I don't mean that in a positive, negative, it's a neutral way, but there are different professions that have different kind of characteristics, and we like task. And I know this because I've done library management skills institutes for almost 30 years all over the world, and we do little behavior styles instruments. And we have certain characteristics that come up all the time in our professional community that are different than other professional communities. So I'm not just kind of making this up. We like task, right? We're good at getting things done. But equity lives in the process, right? And so in our organizations right now, where we're all wrestling with this issue of equity, like what the heck is it? How do we do it? How do we do it well? Process is the opportunity. There's not going to be a magic checklist of tasks that we can accomplish in order to create a more equitable organization or a more equitable profession or a more equitable world. We are going to actually have to invest in process. Here's the tough part about process. We don't like process. And process can be messy. Even the most beautifully designed process is still messy. It's called the messy middle. Right? And as an organizational development person, which is what I do, I live in this space all the time, so I understand it. And it's still painful for me. And I've chosen to do this. But in our organizations, it's trickier because it's hard to measure process, right? And we're into things that are more measurable, more demonstrable because we have to be. And so it's really tricky to think about how do we make sure that we have processes that allow us to live out our values, that allow for structured approaches, that allow for progress over time, and know that there are going to be some pieces that are not going to be immediately measurable. Remember I said that 11-year-old happy, healthy hold? If my dipstick is yesterday when he was having a little meltdown, little tiny meltdown, then I would be pretty unsatisfied, right? But that's not the right dipstick for process, right? So task, maybe there are certain things that we have a dipstick around, a way of measuring that is unique to those things. But there are certain things that have to do with our ability to grow our capacity in our organization, our workforce transformation sorts of things, people's ability to kind of reskill or align skills with new expectations or with new organizational structures or with new organizational strategies. Those are longer term, right? Those can't have one dipstick at one very short and very near-term point in time, and that is going to be satisfying because you will never get the right answer. That's not how human behavior works. And so it's really important to think about how is it that we create processes that allow for the right way of measuring, knowing that it won't always be easily predictable. Human behavior, you can't, every single thing is not going to be predictable or linear. And also that we also need to think about ways in which we're structuring this so that there's a lot of equity. And the equity pieces are really thinking about what are the voices that are included, how is it that we're making sure that we are very intentionally applying tools like an equity lens to different parts of our processes so that we can look back and adjust and review where we're going and how we're doing it, how we're thinking about transparency and communication and those sorts of things. But the process is an opportunity for all of us. Now, here's what process requires for any of you, any of you, regardless of what level of leadership you're in. It requires that you pause. It requires not pause, long pause, as in be still and don't get anything done, but pause and say, what is the outcome that we seek here? Or what are the outcomes that we seek here? That might just be more than restructuring, from A to Z, or getting this position filled, or getting this task accomplished. There may be other sorts of measures of success that have to do with building capacity, with having new voices that are present and able to take on new roles in the organization, positioning people for being able to have different relationships on or across campus or in different parts of the organization that may have to do more with kind of long-term internal capacity. Let's pause and think about that, and then let's think about the way that we intentionally engage a process that allows us to get to those things. It does require a pause. So here's the tricky part about all of this is that, and this is where the courage comes in, that we live in a really, really tricky world right now. Now, this world didn't just get tricky. It's been tricky, right? I know that. I know it's not all of a sudden tricky. And it's not only tricky in the United States. I know that too. But we live in a time where people are actually saying, I don't want to be at the front of the room. I don't want to be the one who speaks up. I don't want to be the person in that role, because the singular focus on me having the right answer is not a place that I want to be. I would say now is the time for courage. Like opting out, that's a privilege. For anyone in this room or anyone anywhere who says, you know what, I want to opt out because I don't really want to be in that position, I'm going to push back and encourage you to do it anyway, to lead anyway, to lead in spite of your fear, to know that it's not going to be easy, but our values, our shared values, our aspiration about, having organizations that are happy and healthy and whole, and working groups and teams and colleagues and ourselves who are happy and healthy and whole is so compelling that not doing it is not an option. And if I opt out, who will do it? Who's going to do it? Is it going to be the people who are already in the not privileged positions? Really? That's not how it works. Children don't end child abuse, right? It takes people in positions of power and privilege regardless of where we are. I don't have to be the director to be a person who has power and privilege. I have regardless of who I am in my identities, and I have a lot of identities, I have some power and privilege, some opportunities for making a difference, for leading. That might mean I have to be uncomfortable sometimes, but it's because we are working towards this compelling future destination together. And that unless I'm here and unless I'm willing to do the hard work and unless I'm willing to lead, and sometimes it might be tough, that we're not actually going to get there. Right. And so really thinking about the fact that in spite of the reasons why I may say I don't want to do it, I'm going to just invite you and encourage you and ask you, do it anyway. So this is a model that many of you have already probably seen. It's a super popular model. I didn't make it up. There's a million of them that are different versions of this. And everybody has opinions about the models, about, oh, I think there should be this box or that box. I'm not going to tell you how many boxes there should be. That's kind of besides the point right this second. The bigger issue is that we are, and you know this, we are reconceptualizing the idea of equity. We are reconceptualizing what it means to really think about our organizations and our systems. That's not unusual. That's what culture does. The United States is a young culture, culturally speaking, right? And again, I'm an interculturalist first. And so I think about the long haul, right? So from a cultural point of view, the United States is a young culture. And what are we going through? We're going through growing pains right now. Right? So I don't feel overwhelmed. Sometimes I feel a little overwhelmed, but I think that this is kind of the growing pains that cultures go through. But we could do this well or not well, right? It's happening anyway. How is the opportunity? So let me just tell you quick couple of little points about this model. I'm not going to belabor the model itself, but just to mention it. So the equality over here is kind of in the United States, at least for those of you who are from the United States, equality is one of the fundamental kind of cornerstone values in the United States. Ironically, right? It's ironic that equality is one of our cornerstone values for a million different reasons, but I don't need to explain all that to you right now. You go see Hamilton. We are all on the same page, right? So, but equality is one of the cornerstones. Here's the tricky part. Equality doesn't actually play out that way. Regardless of how much we say we value it, even if we really do value it, it doesn't actually play out as equality, right? Equity is this little one over here where there are 3 kids, different sizes, trying to see over a fence to a ball game. Now, I know some people write me all the time and start talking about, is it okay that the kids are cheating and getting into the ball game? Let's not even talk about that right now. And if you're going to email me, like my email is filled up with that. I have its own separate folder about people who want to talk about the ball game. I didn't make this up. The more important part about this is that this is the way we've been talking about equity for decades. For like 50 years in the United States, we've been talking about equity from the same model. Here's the tricky part about this. So kind of conceptually, it seems cool. It's like, yeah, let's give a box to a kid who needs a box, and a kid who needs 2 boxes, we're going to give that kid 2 boxes. Yeah, that makes sense. Here's the tricky part. It doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because there aren't enough boxes. We run out of boxes. We all live in organizations and in realities where we have finite boxes. We have a finite amount of resources. So think about it. I've been in the library community for a long time. A lot of you have been in the library community for a long time, or even if it's been a short time. We've created all these different programs. We've created, special residency programs and scholarship programs and leadership programs. Those are boxes. Here's a box for you, and here's a box for you, right? It's like Oprah, and you get a car, and you get a car. We're handing out boxes. Here's the tricky part. We don't have enough boxes to make this a sustainable model forever and ever, and for all the different identities, because there's a whole lot of different identities that also say, I need a box, rightfully so, right? The other part about this, and this is the even bigger part, I think, as far as the problematic part, is that this model puts people who need a box in a deferential system, in a deferential relationship to the person or the system that's handing out boxes. So they're saying, okay, it's the end of the year. Can I get another box? Can I get another box? They're running around begging for boxes their whole life, right? The issue is the fence, not the kid. This is called a deficit-based model. So the deficit-based model of equity is there are certain individuals and or groups who have a deficit compared to the norm, And we need to help them through special accommodations. Now, I'm not saying get rid of all the special programs that exist. I am not downing those at all. We just haven't figured another way out yet, but we're working on it. And I mean we as in all of us are working on it. But it's really important to know that this model is not sustainable. And not only is it not sustainable because of the resources, it's not sustainable because it's concretizing a mindset. Remember that belief system to select data thing that I just mentioned? So we'll have a belief system about certain groups, certain individuals, what they have, what they don't have, and what they need in order to be successful here, like us. And then we select data that reinforces what those people need in order to be successful here. And then we create things like recruitment processes around it. It's called the deficit-based model of equity, right? And it's problematic. I'm not saying we figured it out yet. I'm just reinforcing the fact that a lot of the efforts that we've taken on to try to create more equitable or to create diversity, more diversity, like with our recruitment, our retention processes have come out of this mindset. And it's really important for us to just think about it and interrogate it. Like, let's think about where we're coming from. Now, this could go on and on, but here's the tricky part. The opportunity here at the very end of this model is to think about where it is that we can take down the fence, right? So the whole point is to get us to really think about what is the actual barrier here to equity. And this simple cartoon is meant to say the barrier is the fence, right? How do we look for fences in our own systems and then bring those down? And I don't mean tear everything down. Now, there's some folks who say tear it all down. I don't know what it would look like to rebuild it, so I can't. I'm kind of like Daenerys. So there are some folks who are like Daenerys, and I'm kind of like Jon at the end, right? I'm like, I don't know what it would look like. And Daenerys is like, burn it all down. And I'm like, well, wait, I'm not sure. What do we do, right? I was perfect. That was a perfect analogy. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, ask a neighbor. It's like a, but the opportunity here is to think about what are some of the easy fences that are in front of us, really obvious fences, right? Our classification systems in our obvious, not easy, maybe that's what I should. Our classification systems in our organizations, right? Or things that we do or the way that we put people on search, or their search committees, the way we organize and prepare search committees, the way we think about recruitment criteria, the way that we onboard people, right? The way that we think about preparing people to actually actively be on committees or project task forces or those sorts of things. The tricky part about this model, the newer model of equity, the kind of the equity mindset that we're working towards is this. Once you start pulling a thread on one system that is not giving you the equity that we need or want, it's just kind of like a piece of cloth. You pull a string here and then you pull another string there and it all just starts to fall away. They're all connected to each other. So here's my takeaway from that. Don't let the enormity of this conversation stop you. That's the tricky part, and that's the courageous part. As leaders, don't let the fact that equity is so big keep you from doing it, from pursuing it. Don't let the fact that you know that there's going to be a whole lot of effort into this and it's never going to be particularly solvable in a very simple, straightforward way keep you from doing the important work. So a couple of things, and then I'd love to hear any comments or questions from you. As courageous leaders in action, I encourage you to really think about for yourself, model the way and create the path for others. Invite, encourage, listen, pause, reflect, and model those things behaviorally. Reflect on why you want to be a leader and what you bring. And again, I'm not talking about titular leadership roles, and I'm hoping that every single person in this room is thinking of themselves as a leader. And I'm saying that on purpose because I'm just going to speak for myself. I need a whole lot of leaders. As a colleague, I need all of us to be thinking about how it is that we are going to make sure that our professional community kind of thrives and has full participation and voices and opportunities. This is a really wonderful, values-rich professional community. It's such a wonderful place to have spent my career, but it's going to require all of us to help us continue transforming and breathing life into it. Seek feedback. Keep the gap between who you want to be and who you are, and how you're showing up small. So that 1 to 0.321, try to keep it at a 1 to 1. And feedback, like Serena, just channel your inner Serena. Develop a reputation for being helpful. It's really useful. And people ask me all the time, like, how can I be more influential? How is it that I can have people see me in a different light? And this is a very simple little thing, but actually kind of being in the service of others, in the service of the organization, not just talking about or positioning something as your idea or your need or your ask, but instead how it is that you can help the organization, help your colleagues, help your team, help advance something that's important. It's a wonderful opportunity to be influential. Create transparency and nurture trust. And transparency means, let me tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from. Here's what I believe right now, and here's the data that I selected, right? Here's where I'm coming from. Let me just share that with you. And then please tell me where you're coming from. And really encourage more communication that allows people to be able to understand the different perspectives, which may not be obvious between even two people, let alone across a larger group. And then explicitly and intentionally practice inclusivity, looking for opportunities to surface and remove fences in your processes. And starting off with the small ones, What are the questions that we might be asking that are kind of getting in the way of us being able to see different perspectives or hear a dissenting point of view, or that might be reinforcing a collective bias that we have because we all come from the same professional background, for example. So really thinking about opportunities to create equity. Yes, yes, yes. I just gave you a huge list of things, right? I just gave you a huge list of things. Oh, and by the way, keep doing your regular job. Just get started. Practice, get started. It's a journey. It's a forever journey. Just be intentional. Keep thinking of it. Don't let fear get in your way. And know that, that aspiration is so compelling that if all of us are going there together, we can support each other and we can get there, right? And so practice with each other and use each other as coaches and as mentors and as trusted advisors. And with that said, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to take any questions or comments. And thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for this enlightening talk. The question is, we are all perfect, of course. So how do we open that conversation with our leadership in our organizations that they need to be seeking that feedback, like the 1 to 0.321? How do we say, you need to be paying attention to this?
That is the number one. That's the number one question that comes when I show that ratio. So, what might be interesting is to use this conference as an opportunity to do kind of a follow-up. Like, hey, I had this interesting kind of piece of information that was shared with me when I was at the NASIC conference. And have you seen this ratio? So, right, have you seen this? This is really interesting. And let me tell you why I'm sharing with you. I'm sharing with you because I have it kind of really stuck with me that at any point in my own career, I could be thinking about how I keep my ratio small. And so I'm going to do this. You know what would be interesting? How do you do it, boss? Right? So really thinking about the kind of you want to be diplomatic, of course, but it could be by sharing a little bit about, here's what I'm thinking. I think I have an opportunity to maybe talk to my colleagues or do some self-reflection. How do I, and to make sure that it's not just me perceiving myself and that equals reality. But I would love to hear from you. How do you do this? Or how does this happen in this organization? Or how is this facilitated in this organization? So it might kind of open up a conversation like that. By the way, I happily and generously share that ratio often. So you're not the only person who knows about it. And I really encourage people. And I also do quite a lot of executive coaching with people at AUL and UL levels. So I've also talked with them about it. Now, they start off the same way. We're all perfect, but but it takes an act of kind of consistency. What about others? Anybody else?
Hi, DeEtta.
Hello.
Thanks for the presentation. I have a question about like what you think about intergenerational workplace dynamics and multi-generational. And I think we all know this, the library is changing with a lot of new different cultures. You had mentioned some of it, and if you can comment on that. Thanks.
Yes. So, this is interesting because we've always had intergenerational workplaces. It's just that it keeps changing, right? And as time goes on, we continue to find ourselves at a different part of the intergenerational conversation, right? So when I first came into the library community, I was like, yeah, and as an early career person, this is how I feel. And now I'm like advocating on behalf of like early career folks, even though I am far from early career, right? So how do we think about that? Here's the thing. Power dynamics are really tricky. A lot of times, so because I've worked with so many folks who are early career through the course of my experience in the leadership programs, what I often have people tell me, and this, I mean, a lot of people who are new to our professional community tell me, is that their voices are not heard or taken seriously, or they're discounted because they're relatively new to this professional community, or they're seen as young, right? And people will say things like, oh yeah, you're young enough to be my son's age, or oh yeah, just wait till you get tenure, you'll see how things really work around here. And those are, first of all, those are microaggressions. Let's just call it what it is. But also, it really diminishes people's ability to throw in ideas, to learn, to grow, and we lose a lot of really cool ideas. We lose a lot of potential for contribution and opportunity, and there's a lot of power. So it's tricky to think about this, and this is the one place. So I think that in our professional community, we actually think that minimizing the voice of people who are either younger than us or are early or more early career is acceptable. Now, I'm not saying we are saying that, but I think that it is seen as the most acceptable. When I hear language, it seems like it's more okay to talk about, oh yeah, you're just young, or oh yeah, you're my daughter's age. That seems more acceptable than saying, oh yeah, well, you're Black, right? It seems like it's okay. And one of the things that I challenge us to do is to really think about how we might be minimizing and also marginalizing, but also really missing out on some great opportunities. Now, with that said, how do we structure that so that there's onboarding processes or feedback or coaching processes where we're really finding ways to be able to appreciate? So it's not just, oh, I'm this age and you're that age, or I've been in the professional community this long and you've been that long, so let's just match and talk about longevity. But instead, where we actually start looking for opportunities to work together on things that are mutually beneficial, satisfying, and in the service of the organization. That sort of proximity that is across different identities, but in the service of a shared goal, is how it is that we build respect and admiration for each other across different identities. So finding ways to actually work together across identities, across what potentially could be power or privilege dynamics in the service of a shared goal, where we're maximizing the opportunity for each individual to bring forward their own talents, that is the opportunity for really building respect, but also really building admiration and full participation. But we have to intentionally look for it, and we also have to check our own biases. Yes.
So I work for a 13,000 person company spread all over the globe, and we hired one diversity and inclusion officer recently. And so,
I love how you said one.
yeah, and so what I'm wondering, because I don't know much about HR, that's not my specialty, are a lot of companies hiring these officers, and are they working out? Is it working out?
Good question. Yes and no. And I don't mean no as in the people aren't incredibly talented and have deep areas of competence and expertise. The no is that we have for decades put diversity in the lap of a particular individual and or like a committee, which is absolutely backwards. It just doesn't make sense. We wouldn't do that with anything else that's strategic. We wouldn't be like, you go get them. You go get them. You singularly do diversity. It doesn't make sense. So until it literally doesn't make sense. And the other thing is you don't do diversity like that. And so one of two things happens is that these folks, this diversity officer, ends up being kind of stretched so thin that things don't get done as effectively or as measurably as we want or expect, kind of, and we're comparing it with other parts of our organization, and then we say, see, it didn't work. Or that person is incredibly successful, does a lot of cool stuff, and then they're recruited off. Those are the two options. And it happens over and over. And so the opportunity for us, I think for us, is for every single one of us to build cultural competency into the fabric of our organization and to start moving equity and inclusive from, in the words of the great bell hooks, from margin to center, where it's integrated and sustainable into our organization. The tricky part is that we all have mental models that diversity kind of sits over here, that it's ancillary. And we need to shift our mental models. Our paradigm needs to shift, that equity, diversity, inclusion, cultural competence is part of the way that we run our business. It's part of the way that managers do feedback and coaching, the way we design and develop our rewards and recognition programs, the way that we do all of our systems, and also the way that hiring managers have responsibility for things like reporting and performance reviews. It's integrated the way that we integrate into other parts of our systems.
We have time for just one more question.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. So I have a question about positions of power and privilege. I know I am in them. I don't feel powerful.
Yes.
And I think I can do a lot of damage if I can't recognize my power and my privilege. And I was wondering, even though my perception isn't reality, are there ways to combat that perception that I don't have power? And are there ways that I can practice using power, even though power doesn't feel like what I thought power would feel like?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. And a lot of times, and especially in our professional community, we're a very democratic kind of professional community. So people are like, I'm not powerful. But the tricky part is, ask the people who report to you. Power dynamics are acute if you're on the other side of them. Right? And so as long as you're on the other side of the power dynamic, you can see it. But if it's you who has the power, me who has the power, I often don't feel it. It's kind of the air I breathe. That's just the way that power dynamics, not only the way that power dynamics work, but it's kind of the privilege that's associated with it. So one is to actually just take a pause like you just did and say, well, maybe I do, and let me think about where and how that shows up. Right? Two is to just intentionally say, where is, and power in a titular way, it may be, I am a manager, for example. But privilege is also things like simple things like, okay, here I am with my team. If I am a manager and we're having a team discussion about doing X or Y, and it may be that we have an idea that we want to explore. You say, you know what, everyone, what I'd like to ask is that everyone come prepared to the meeting with a couple of thoughts about options. Here are the ones that we've already considered. Here are the criteria that we've already explored. Come with a couple of options. And then as the facilitator or the manager of the team, and so the first power dynamic that you're executing on is being able to give people forewarning so that they can prepare to contribute and that they know that there's an opportunity for contribution. Then at the meeting, you can say, okay, I'd love to hear from all of you. And they may say, well, what do you think? And you say, you know what? I'd like to go last. I'd really actually like to hear from you first. That's creating space, where you say, I'm going to step back and I'm going to invite you to go first. Because even if you intended or not, oftentimes people who have the most power in the room, once your idea gets out, people anchor to it, right? And I'm not saying that always happens, but that typically happens, and it's very typical phenomenon. People anchor to it. And there's all sorts of different research around this. So simple little tiny techniques all the time where you're intentionally thinking, how is it that I invite? No, you go first. But not you go first without any preparation, where I'm just blindsiding you and saying, no, you just talk. But I give you an opportunity. Hey, before we get together for our one-on-one, maybe, could we start off by you sharing, let's talk about these three things. Or here's some ideas I have about an agenda. You share with me some things that you're working on, maybe some things that you need from me, and what I could do more of or differently, right? And we come prepared to have a conversation where it's kind of a feedback conversation for me as your manager, where I say, okay, so how are things going? What is it that I could do more of or differently? And is there anything that you're working on right now that it might be helpful for me to know about? But you start, and it's also an opportunity for you to share from me in a very small, kind of finite space, something that I could do more of, where you're able to give me constructive. And I don't say, what do I suck at? Because people won't tell me. You won't tell me if I'm your boss. But is there something I could do more of or differently? Differently isn't so loaded, right? And so little language choices that create opportunity for people to be able to share information with me that's not intimidating, right? And so small, little, tiny things. The consistency, again, it doesn't have to be intensity, consistency, but a lot of times just tiny little language choices are wonderful opportunities for sharing space, for creating more equity in our power relationships. There's bigger things too, but sometimes it's the small things that kind of add up on a day-to-day basis that are really important. Okay, my friends, thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you. Have a good conference.